My full name is Yoshiharu Hashimoto. I was born in Revelstoke, British Columbia, March the 7th, 1940.
Okay.
My mother's name was Hisa, born Nishino, and Kunitaro Hashimoto was my father's name. Well, they were both born in Japan. Uh, my mother was from an area called Matsubara, and my father was from an area called Niugaku. They're in the Fukuoka prefecture of Kyushu, Japan.
Okay.
I understood that he came over when he was 18 years old in 1900. So he was born in what, 1882?
Mhm.
Yeah, and then he worked on the West Coast on the railway. I think it was the Grand Trunk Pacific or something like that before he was in the interior with the CPR.
Okay.
And my mother came along much later because my father went through several uh, marriages before she was my mother. So I have half siblings from the other mother,
Okay.
the other wife. They were all born in Canada, all except one of the 10 siblings. Uh, yeah, they were all born in Canada, and they were taken back to Japan to be raised by aunts and uncles.
When your parents married, so they where did they live when they first were married?
I imagine it was Revelstoke. They spent uh, the first few years living in on the railroad in the gang cars. My mother was hired as the cook for the workers, and they all boarded in those work trains.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until much later that they bought the house that you're familiar with in Revelstoke on Humbert Street. Yeah, that was the one and only house that we lived in.
Okay.
I have a sister and two brothers. No, wait a minute. There's three sisters and two brothers. Yeah. And my half sisters were always in Japan. They never were here. Yes, Kunio and his twin sister, uh, Hisae. Yeah, and there was another sister that also stayed in Japan, and all the half sisters and half brother, so all stayed in Japan. We were out in what was South Revelstoke, which was out of the city limits at that time. And it was quite rural, quite open. And so we had a lot of space to play in, a lot of space to grow up. And we went across fields to go fishing. And so we knew that whole area for what was there. And so we knew all our neighbors, even though they were separated by big open fields, which is not what we see today.
Mhm.
Yeah, we were quite far from town at that time, but 4th Street was our main access to the stores and schools. And we were sent to school from there, and we walked all the way up to what was Selkirk School. We went to kindergarten in the early days. I walked all the way up 4th Street to the Catholic church where we had the kindergarten, and we were all taught by the nuns, which all of their finery, their robes and pictures on the wall were quite fascinating to me. Of course, we asked all kinds of questions about what we saw. So the Japanese we learned were from our parents, daily conversations. And we never were formally taught, I guess. We just, that was the language that we learned right from when we were little. All the little songs and rhymes that they used to sing to us, we kind of passed them on.
So when you started kindergarten, did you speak English as well already?
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah. That's how we conversed with the nuns and
Right.
pestered them about. I still picture the black robes that they wore with the chain around their waist hanging down, and
How did
yes.
the Second World War affect your family?
Well, what happened as a result of that, and it were other folks were moved to the internment camps. My dad and all the other Japanese that worked on the railroad were all removed from the railroad, so they had to find other places to live. And luckily, we had a house, and so even though they no longer had work, we had at least a place to live and a big garden, which was key to our survival. We also had raised chickens too, and at one point we had pigs, as I remember, but I don't know what happened to that because wasn't in my memory that long. They scrounged around, and there was a sawmill nearby, which we would get scrap wood and a dairy that they were able to get a bit of work, and we did a lot of berry picking and things like that. Yeah, we went picked other people's strawberries, and we also grew our own and raspberries too. So that was a lot of our chores revolved around the garden. At that time, we had no running water, so we had a couple of wells, which our job after school was to come home and dip the buckets into the well and go to the back of the garden and start watering to the front.
Mhm.
But it's good because we had good soil there. And we used to top up the soil uh, from Venuti's transfers horse manure. We had 2 acres there, and half of it was just a field. And so we traded the hay off the field for the manure that he would come and dump in the garden. So we had good soil. I delivered papers.
Mhm.
We had to walk all the way to the high school, which was, the old high school. That was a distance. We did a lot of running in those days to get to school on time. And wintertime was a little tough. We had no snow plows coming down Humbert Street. My brother was always sent ahead to break trail through the snow, and we followed afterwards. I remember in grade five, I was in grade five, when they were finally had enough money from having gotten back to work that we finally were able to have a Christmas. Up until then, we had no Christmases. We went to the Pentecostal church that was on that little church at the bottom of that hill on what's that, Third Street. And then after when I joined the Cubs and Scouts, the troop was in the United Church. So I ended up going to the United Church and yeah, stayed there for the rest of my religious training.
Mhm.
Mrs. Abramson was our senior Sunday school teacher. She led us through the catechism at the United Church until we got our became members of the church and did our catechism there.
Mhm.
Yeah, there was a bunch of us senior kids in her class. I remember Harry Johnson and Johnny Abramson, Johnny Rutherford. Yeah, it's a wonder we're all older boys in that Sunday school class. So it's kind of different. We maybe because Mrs. Abramson we liked her. She was a good Sunday school teacher. But we always participated in whatever was happening. There were always a parade or something. We always were involved in making the decorations. I remember, and my dad made sure that somehow we were always in the Fourth of July parade, and I was usually nominated to be the whatever it was. I remember he he made a kind of a float on a child's wagon that had a cage on it with a chicken and some chicks, and he had a big sign that said something about uh, watch something watch Revelstoke grow, and he I had to pull that in the parade. So they were quite civically minded, and they always make sure that we are involved somehow. Fall fair, my mother was always putting in uh, flowers, and I seemed to be the one that had to do the chore like things where I had to take the flowers to the fall fair and make sure they got arranged. My mother never won anything though. Mr. Chichilla was the winner always with his gladiolas. He tried to tell my mother what the gladiola should look like if she was going to enter them into the fall fair. I think she thought that as long as they looked pretty, but she always participated like that. Her and some other Japanese ladies went to ESL. They had ESL classes for immigrants, and I remember helping her with the workbook with the speaking and writing English. And she got to the point where she wasn't afraid to talk to people in her broken English. Sometimes it used to surprise me some of the words that she could use.
Did your father read and write English?
He did. He did. I've kept some of his letters that he wrote. I have those in a he had this monstrous big dictionary that he used to study from. I don't know what happened to it. I remember having it, and that was his only textbook that he had that he used, and and it was important for him for his work that he was able to converse in Japanese, right, or in English. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, he had a lot of responsibility on the railroad. He had to be able to read the timetables for the trains that would be coming and going, and arrange uh, work schedules and things like that. So what we did during that time. But she did decide that she wanted to take this training, so she had to go to Japan to do it. And the only way to travel for her at that time was by steamship. She went
Mhm.
across and she took this course. I have a number of photos about that. And she brought back with her the equipment that she needed to do this. And she set up a little room in that house where uh, I don't know if you call them clients or patients or people with aches and pains that she would work on and fix them up.
I understand that one of her clients was Sophie Atkinson, the painter.
Yes, I think that's how they met,
Mhm.
and they became good buddies, and, and that's how I met Sophie and became one of her students. Wish I had studied more, learned more from her. She
So,
tried though. She tried hard to teach me how to do watercolor. That's not so easy as it looks.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah, Mrs. Ogino and I worked together with her, and she had her driver's license, so she would we would drive to someplace and try to do some landscape paintings in the style of Atkinson. But yeah, when we were little, there was some name calling and stuff like that. And but most of the folks in our end of town anyway were immigrants of one kind or another.
So you had an experience where you got to meet Queen Elizabeth II. Can you tell us about that experience?
Well, I was already in university or college, I guess, first year college. So that's when she came through, and they wanted uh, Cubs and Scouts to be on kind of parade at the railway station. So I still had my scout uniform, and so did the boys, Lenny Brown and a few others. So we all got dressed up and lined up, and her and Prince Philip came by, and I can't remember what they said, but they said something. And they had a bit of a chat with Lenny Brown, who was right beside me, because he was in Scouts in Edinburgh, and he still had the little thing on his shoulder with Edinburgh on it. So that caught her eye. So she was speaking. So I got to hear what her voice sounded like because she was standing right there. But they had a good time with the Cub Scouts. They were around the other side of the railway station, and oh, what was the scoutmaster's name? He was, I think he was a fire chief. Oh, what was his name? Anyway, he asked the Queen Elizabeth if she would mind taking part in their little circle. And so he said that she said that she'd be delighted. So she stepped in and they did their dib 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 wow or whatever it was that they do and went off. So that was that experience. And somebody took a picture of us all standing there. And that's the one only time I met her.
Mhm.
It was great growing up in Revelstoke. I had good friends. Peter Grauer and I used to climb Mount Revelstoke a lot. We climb all the way up to the top, and then we'd hitchhike back down. So that was our kind of a ritual. I had a picture somewhere of us having a little break in the middle by the sign. Yeah, and I did a lot of I met a lot of the older folks because my mother knew a lot of all of the older folks, and so I ended up mowing a lot of lawns. I remember where my where Cuneo lives right now was the Henderson house, and there was Mrs. Henderson. I can't remember her first name, and her cronies would sit on the porch and watch me mow the lawn. And one day, Mrs. Henderson was introducing me to her friend, and, and her friend said, "Oh," she said, "This is Yoshi," and her friend said, "Oh, I thought his name was Joshua." So I remember that. And I had to laugh, and I did. Dave Mitchell was the principal of uh, Selkirk at that time. I remember doing his lawn. So that was my aspect of growing up. I kept busy. Gino Gino was responsible for me having a paper route. It was in the middle of winter, and he somehow broke his leg. So his mother showed up on our doorstep with a sack full of Vancouver Suns. And for some reason or other, I had gone around with Gino, so I kind of knew what his route was. And so she knew that and dumped these papers off in the middle of the night. And I had to deliver these things in the snow up to my waist in some areas, and especially in where what they call New Scotland, uh, on Edward Street, I think it was. I had to wade through the snow at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night trying to get the paper to their doors. Probably didn't have to do that, but I kind of felt responsible to do it. So then I had that paper route he never got it back. So South Revelstoke was my route. It was the worst route too, because all the houses were so far apart. Yeah. Now high school was good. I enjoyed high school. Had good friends. Well, yeah, I started in Revelstoke, in Farwell, what was Farmell Elementary School, taught grade 5. Uh, Mr. Stringer was the principal. He was principal of 2 schools. He was principal of that school and Southbury School at the same time. And then after that, I uh, moved to Prince George, uh, and I taught grade 5 up there in a couple of schools. And it was there that I changed over to the senior secondary, Prince George Secondary, and was a senior art teacher for a while. And then they put me in the counseling department for some reason. Well, I know the reason, but it was strange that they would ask me to do that. So I ended up being a counselor for a number of years until I moved to Mission, where I stayed in the secondary system as a counselor. And then I retired from the Mission School District.